Hello.
Chris, tell us what's coming up today.
Lovely. Well, I'm incredibly delighted to introduce our next speaker. We've got a real treat. So our next speaker, our speaker tonight, is a speaker who is not only an author of some fantastic books on entomology, also he's an award-winning TV star. But before he did all of that, he actually spent 25 years here in the museum working amongst our biggest collection, and that's our entomological collections. So he spent 25 years teaching, researching, and curating 5 million insects. And within that, we have actually an even more important collection, the Hope Entomological Collection, which is one of the oldest and the largest collection of British insects in the whole world. It's over 1 million species, and it has a record of all sorts of animals going back from before the Industrial Revolution, through the Industrial Revolution, right up to date, and all the biodiversity information that includes. And at the moment, we're actually recurating those insects. So with help from the National Heritage Lottery Fund and lottery players, we're actually rehousing and conserving those insects for future generations of scientists, and embarking on a large public engagement outreach program as well. So if you'd like to donate to that, obviously ask bill payers permission if you're under 18. If you'd like to donate, I think we have a button coming up on the side that will allow you to donate, and all your donations will go straight to conserving that amazing collection. But I mean, why should you donate to that question? It gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who's Dr. George McGavin. So George, are you there? I know you're there somewhere.
Oh, no. Hello.
Lovely. Hello.
Thank you for
nice to see you, George.
Wonderful introduction.
So, George, what have insects ever done for us?
Button to donate. All the cash comes to me. Right. Shall we start? Well, my talk tonight is what have insects ever done for us, and it's very much a spoof take on that sketch in the film that we all love, Life of Brian, where one of the people says to the other one, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" And the guy says, "Well, education." "Well, apart from education, what have the Romans ever done for us?" "Well, canals, aqueducts." "Yeah, but apart from those." Well, it's a bit like that. And I'm very grateful to Chris Jarvis, who gave me such a great introduction, but he also drew this slide here, which is a representation in cartoon form of all the jobs that insects do for us. And you can see the beetle there clearing up some dung and taking away various bits and pieces, things eating each other, birds eating them. And the guy in the middle, the green beetle there with his soup spoon and his chef's hat, I think he looks French. So I think he would be saying, "Vous ne savez rien. You know nothing. You human beings, you are stupid." And I think that's largely true. And in the course of my next few slides, I hope to be able to persuade you that, in fact, we don't know very much, actually. Well, all journeys begin somewhere, and this is me in class 1 or class 2 at school in Edinburgh, where I grew up. And I wasn't a brilliant scholar. I was average, pretty hopeless at some things, but I did like biology very much indeed. And I used to get things in my end of term card. This is me, by the way. George needs to concentrate more. A fly going past would distract him. Well, that's a very prescient utterance from my form teacher there when I was 5 or 6, because flies distract me then and they distract me now. And there's very good reason why we should be distracted by flies, because they are remarkable animals. And I have spent a lifetime being distracted by flies and other creatures, and long may it go on. Well, I must have been about 10 or 12 when I was given a hand lens. This isn't the original one, which I have in the shed somewhere. I can't find it. But this is a ×10 hand lens, which I got handed as a gift, and it opened up a whole new world of wonder. And I have never been without one ever since. And I would thoroughly recommend, as the festive season is soon upon us, anybody who has grandchildren, in my case, or if you're younger, if you have your own children, or various other children in your household, buy them a ×10 hand lens. You know, it doesn't have to cost a huge amount, about £5 or £6 at the cheapest. You can spend 20 if you want, but this will open up a whole world to them. Some of them may leave that world eventually, but some of them, like me, will stay in it for the rest of their entire life. Now, I got interested in insects at a pretty early age. I was interested in animals and plants and things generally, but I went to do my degree at Edinburgh University. And in my second year, we went off to do a field course in the west coast of Scotland, in a place called Argyllshire. And my classmates were absolutely fascinated with large animals. They were obsessed with eagles and badgers and owls and all the rest of it, and spent much of the week looking for said animals, of course, failing to find them because large animals are actually quite hard to find. They're not very easy to work with. And yet, when I looked down at our feet, I saw there were literally tens of thousands of these ants doing remarkably interesting things. And I thought, even then, I must have been aged 17, just about. I thought, if you want to understand the world, you really have to understand what insects are doing, because the big stuff is just icing on the cake. It's not really that important. Well, entomology as an academic subject and pursuit really has only been around for about 100 years. So there were obviously amateurs earlier, but here is a picture of a sort of a group of adults who are clearly extremely keen on entomology, and you might think that they were all crusty old chaps, but here's a woman here with her net off hunting for bugs, and it was seen for quite a long time as a sort of amateur pursuit. Well, one of the things that kept me at Oxford for the 25 years to which Chris alluded was the fact that we had such fantastic collections. The Hope collections are unparalleled in the world. And we had in the collections one of the oldest pinned insects in the world. And I shall try and point out where this pin is. But if I just point a little arrow there, that isn't a very neat arrow, is it? My goodness, I should do a much more neat arrow. There we are. Let's have it red or black. Anyway, just there is the head of the pin. Let's make it bigger. Anyway, that was collected in 1702, so in the reign of Queen Anne. And this is, as far as we know, the oldest pinned specimen in the world. There are obviously much older things in graves and tombs in ancient Egypt, because when insects become dry, they survive for a long time. If they stay dry. But this is a specimen which is actually pinned for the purpose of being a specimen. And we are extremely fortunate to have it in our collections at Oxford. The only thing that really annoyed me about it, of course, I thought it'd be quite fun to contact all the curators in England and Scotland and Ireland and tell them that we were going to have a 300th birthday party for the word. It was really only coined in the early 80s, and it led to a lot of work. Individuals thinking for the first time, really, how many species there are on Earth. I mean, we in the early 80s we realized that we really didn't know. We had no answer to this, and so individuals all around the world began to to try and evaluate it, to put an estimate on how many species there were. And this is a great image of Terry Irwin of the Smithsonian, who decided to spray trees with pesticides, or fog them, I should say. And he picked one species of tree, Luhia semani, and he sprayed them. And under the trees, he'd arrange these big sheets which would collect everything which fell out of the leaves. And on the basis of what he collected, he had to make various assumptions about if other trees would have the same volume of insects, how much of those would be new and wouldn't be found on other trees. But after a sort of back of an envelope sum or two, he came up with a figure of 30 million. Well, this was absolutely staggering for the majority of people to realize that we've only named about 1 million species at this point on Earth. And here was this person saying there were 30 million species, mainly insects, in the world. Well, of course, everybody got very excited about this indeed. And there was almost a sort of auction for a while. It was all around the world. There were experts fogging and spraying trees here, there, and everywhere, and saying, "Oh yes, my calculations say there are 40 million, 50 million. Do I have 60 million? Going at 55 million. Thank you, Professor So-and-so. Any advance on 55 million, 60 million?" And it went on like this for about 10 years until I think one of the highest estimates was 80 or 100 million, which of course everybody knew was pretty absurd. Well, despite all this, we still have come down to the vague figure of between 8 and 12. I mean, it's as vague as that. So we think there are probably 8 million species, mostly insects, and there might be as many as 12. But here is a pie chart of the fraction of what we actually know about. So here are plants, algae, and fungi, etc. Excuse me for having shoved them all in the one group there. 20%. That's them. Vertebrate animals, and this will come as a surprise to lots of individuals who think of a zoologist as somebody who works on zebras and gnus and whales and the like. Well, animals with a backbone comprise just less than 3% of all species on Earth, and that's everything from aardvarks to zebras, blue whales, bats, cats, rats, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, fish, us. The whole shebang, everything with a backbone. And that leaves you with a whopping great group, the invertebrate animals, which are the majority. And the majority of those, of course, are insects. So I knew at an early age, and I still know, that if you want to understand the natural world and you don't understand what insects are doing or what they are, you don't really understand anything at all. This is a somewhat scary pie chart, which is an estimate of how many species on Earth we've described and catalogued and named, and the rest that we don't know anything about. Now, when I was at Edinburgh University, I was young and keen and enthusiastic. I'm still that. But I imagined in my youthfulness that there would come a day when we would name everything on Earth. There would come a day, perhaps in 50 years' time, perhaps before I died, that we would name every species on Earth, that we would be able to, quantify everything. Of course, I knew pretty soon after I went from Edinburgh and went elsewhere that this wouldn't happen. It wouldn't ever happen, and it cannot happen, because we are losing habitats at such an alarming rate. And the majority of species on Earth, I'm afraid to say, will come and go without us ever knowing they were there in the first place. That, I'm afraid, is just one of those facts that we have to get into our heads. Now, we're now, as a zoologist, as a group of individuals, we're now asking questions that I never imagined we would ask in my time on Earth. It's a bit like saying, well, look, chaps, we have 200 species of owls in the world. Now, what we have to decide is between us is how many of these owls are important, how many are essential, which owls do we have to hang on to, and which of the owls can we let go to the wall? And that's essentially the sorts of problems that we now face. This is a histogram that's been around for a long time, probably 10 or 12 years old, and it hasn't changed much even today. So it has along the foot, it's got all the animal groups, viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, etc. The green bars at the front represent how many species are in each of those groups that we have named. The black bars at the back are best estimates from experts in the field, in each of these fields, as to how many they think there might be. So you can see immediately that the viruses, bacteria, and fungi are hugely underworked. So if you know a young individual who wants to become a biologist, viruses, bacteria, fungi, single-celled animals, well, we're almost there with them. Algae, yeah, there's a few more. Higher plants, we've pretty much cracked. Vertebrates, this tiny little group, 3% of everything, we've pretty much named most of it. Okay, you find the odd new deer every so often, or something, a new fish, but basically, tick, they're done. Roundworms, mollusks, crustacea, arachnids, hugely underworked, and of course, insects, enormously underworked. And we have to break the bar here. We actually have to break this bar to make it fit. So there, you see, it would go on out the out the roof. So that's essentially it. What we do know, of course, is that insects are the most successful and abundant organisms on Earth by far. They're absolutely an enormous group of animals. And I think it helps to get into your heads the scale of things. I know there are individuals who still believe that the world is 4,004 years old, according to the calculations of Bishop Ussher, but I can assure them that it is a lot older than that, and it is 4.5 billion years old. But what I think is a surprise to most individuals who are new to this is just how much new boys and girls we are on the block. So insects have been around, insects and other arthropods have been around for a pretty long time, and they appear sort of 500 million years ago, Cambrian about here, and then dinosaurs about here, of course. Other way around, Irish go that way, and we are just so recent on Earth as to be almost unbelievable, and we think we've been here for forever. Of course, it is a surprise for some individuals. I used to say to students at their interview, I used to say to them, if you were to go back in a time machine and pluck a child from the hearth of a Stone Age hunter family and bring them back to now, how do you think they'd get on, here today? And some of them would go, oh, well, they'd be terrible. No, they wouldn't. Oh, no, it'd be like, no, they would be absolutely fine. They would go to school. They would learn French, Russian, German, and English. They would have a degree in physics. They would become a Nobel Prize winner. All of it. It's all cultural, and it's happened in a very, very short time indeed. Well, one thing we do know about evolution, and that is evolution loves a beetle. And that is absolutely clear. There are more beetles than anything else on Earth. 1 animal in 4 is a beetle. they're the biggest insect group, although recently individuals who have expertise in flies and wasps are beginning to call this into question, or are beginning to say, well, hang on a minute, you beetle people are so arrogant, you think there's so many, but we think that flies and wasps are just a bit underworked, and we think if we find them all, there'll probably be more. It's a great debate. But of course, one of the interesting things about them, of course, it was about them that the great J.B.S. Haldane was asked by some idiot reporter, Professor Haldane, what can be inferred of the creator by looking at the works of creation? And Haldane, of course, said famously, an inordinate fondness for beetles, and that was the end of the conversation. But it's absolutely true. One of the things that makes them such a successful animal group, of course, is that they have a wing case. And because they have a wing case and they've been able to adapt at every turn, every appearance of plants or whatever it happens to be, the fact that they have a wing case that protects their flying wings means they can go anywhere on Earth, that they can invade any space, any ecosystem, any little habitat that they want. Well, in the 20th century, there was a great backlash against insects. We'd become tired of films about aliens because aliens that we were to invent in our heads weren't very scary. But hang on a minute, there were these real scary things called insects. And of course, there were lots of bee films. Sorry, that's terrible. That were to cast insects as the villain in the piece. We wanted to blame somebody. We wanted to be scared by a film. And so you have these amazingly ridiculous films like The Wasp Woman, a beautiful woman by day, a lusting queen wasp by night. Ooh, yes, that sounds good. And then you got Them, an endless terror from the bowels of the earth. And it goes on and on. There were dozens of these films. Mothra, the mightiest monster in all creation. And this great one, a bee film. I mean, this really is a bee film. They prey on human flesh. I mean, it's just classic. And this is a great one because they wanted to make bombs and napalm and stuff and make it acceptable to the average individual. And so they created the deadly Mantis, and they tried doing everything. They tried hungering for human prey, dwarfing man's machines. Jet planes can't stop him. Flamethrowers, no avail. Trapped by science. You see here on the final little bit here, it says trapped by science. And of course, it was pesticides and napalm, which finally ended its career on Earth. So great, fantastic. But of course, there are insects that I suppose the majority of us would not wish to have around there. Bed bugs, of course. Although I have had some interesting interactions with them. Bed bugs. I was filming in Australia. And I was in this very nice hotel on an island, and I got bitten by bed bugs. And in the morning, I had collected enough bed bugs in a small tube. Always take a little tube with you when you're going on a trip, because you can then put things in it and show it to the hotel owner. And in the morning, I went and said to him, I think you've got bed bugs. And he went, oh, yeah, mate, yeah, why do you think that? And I said, well, I've got some here. And I gave him the bed bugs. And he went, oh, yeah, and who says the bed bugs, mate? I said, well, I do. I'm a professor of entomology at Oxford. Oh, right. And I got a crate of red wine in the evening. It was great. However, I digress. Mosquitoes, horseflies, and the other things that suck your blood are not great, but they are all part of the ecosystem which we have to put up with. The midge here on the bottom right-hand square is the infamous Scottish midge, and I personally am rather fond of this animal because if it was not for the Scottish midge, large parts of Scotland would be absolutely covered in golf courses and condominiums and housing. And it's only this little insect which keeps Scotland pretty much unspoiled. So let's hear it for the Scottish midge. One insect which you probably don't want to have around, of course, is mosquitoes, and they kill 1 million individuals a year of malaria. It's time we got this one sorted out, and there is work afoot which may actually sort it out. I have to say, and I have said before, that if malaria was a disease of Western civilized countries, we'd probably have had it cracked by now, but that's my view. There is a lot of ignorance about insects, a huge amount. This is a pest control van that I saw in Hertfordshire. I think it's Hertfordshire on the side. Is it? Yes. No, sorry, Herefordshire. And I saw this van, and on it is a perfectly good drawing of a honeybee, as you can see. Pest control services, honeybee. And I went up to the guy and said, "Excuse me, sir, you have a drawing of a honeybee on the side of your van. Are they pests? Do you control them?" Good Lord, no. He said, no, that's a wasp. I said, no, I think you'll find that's a honeybee. And once again, and how do you know, sir? Well, well, why are they important? Why should we worry? Why should I spend all my adult career worrying about insects, teaching about insects, making programs about insects? For the very simple fact is that they do things that we can't do ourselves. They provide ecosystem services that we just couldn't do. It would be impossible. They pollinate all the flowering plants. They predate each other. The heaps of insects are controlled by other insects. They recycle everything from animals who've died to dung. And the one thing that's often not said in the books is that they are the food for the majority of animals on Earth. Without insects as food, you simply wouldn't have the large amounts of vertebrate animals because they all eat insects. If we go back to just before 100 million years ago, the world was a rather drab place. It was all browns and greens, of course, because the angiosperms hadn't appeared yet. And it was a pretty drab sort of place. Well, of course, about 100 million years ago, things began to change, and the world would be replaced by a world of color. And this period saw the rise of the flowering plants and, of course, the insects that were specialized to pollinate them. Hitherto, plants had used wind, which is a very haphazard thing. But if you can attract insects and you can reward them in some way, the fraction of pollen that you get to the right place goes up hugely. And so this is a much more efficient way of doing things. Well, today there are something like 20,000 species of bee, and many of them are crucial to world agriculture, and they pollinate three quarters or so of the 80 or so major world crops. Interesting today, I note that the Department of DEFRA have just announced a great program to save the honeybee, to help honeybees by the year 2030. And I was at pains to send them an email immediately saying that honeybees, as far as I was concerned, were not critically endangered at all, and they might be better off spending some cash on bumblebees and other solitary bees as well. It might do a bit more good. I haven't had a reply yet. But without bees, of course, we simply wouldn't have a very long list of fruit and veg, a very long list. I was going to read out the list, but it would take about an hour. So here is a quick snapshot of the sorts of things you would have to say bye-bye to. Now, pollination is such a critical interaction. It's so important, and yet it's a thing that we glance at. Well, here's an image which will stay in your mind, as it has with me. A chap in Staffordshire who I know on Twitter took a series of images of this one sea holly plant. And every so often, every time a bee came, he would go click, 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 and then he would assemble them into this one composite image, which is only 20 or so bees in the space of a quarter of an hour. But in fact, these are only the ones which are sharp. There were actually 80 individual bees in the space of quarter of an hour. 80 bees, perhaps the same ones, we don't know, but 80 times bees came to the flower. And that's happening with flowers all over your gardens everywhere. And there is, of course, one thing there which isn't a bee, and those eagle-eyed among you, I'm sure, will be able to spot the thing which isn't a bee. I'll just highlight it in case you can't see it. There it is. It's a beetle, but it's still doing a good job, as do flies as well. Well, we need to take a lot more care of bees. This, I think, is one of the most horrifying images that I saw in 2016. This is an area in China where they grow lots of pear trees and almond trees and things. Well, over the years, they've used so many pesticides and they've done things that they really oughtn't to have done, that now there are no bees. And so in order to make sure that their crops set seed and they get the fruit and the nuts that they want, they have to pollinate it by hand. This is the cost of what we do. And this isn't just one individual here. There are everybody in this area has to make a little brush on the end of a stick, and they have to pollinate every flower by hand. Can you imagine what if that ever happened here? I mean, it would just be a disaster. Well, it is there too, of course, but they have to do it because there are no bees. Alarm bells should be ringing now, really. Well, it was Einstein who was supposed to have said if the bee disappeared from the face of the earth, humans would only have 4 years to live. I think he was being a little bit pessimistic. I would give it 5 or 10, but certainly no more than that. And there is actually some scant evidence that he actually uttered the words at all. But the one thing that he did actually say, which is absolutely true, is two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I am not yet completely sure about the universe, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Well, this is the problem I have faced in my new career. So in 2007, I resigned from Oxford, not because I hated the place or I hated the job. I was really enjoying the job. I did curation and research and teaching and went on trips. It was fantastic. But on the way home one evening, after 4 hours of tutorials, I had a little sort of thought on the way home. I thought, if I have an audience, if I have a tutorial at Oxford, I have an audience of 4. If I have a cruise ship, which I don't do now, by the way, audience of 400. And if I do an hour on the telly, I might get 4 million. Well, not these days, of course, but and I resigned that day, in fact. But this is the problem that we face, is that as soon as this slide came on, I know that the majority of you, the vast majority of you, your eyes would have been drawn immediately to, oh, what's happened? Oh, I've pressed the wrong button. Chris, help me. I pressed the wrong button. Oh, thank you, Chris. Saved by the bell. I know for a fact that what you all looked at was the cute furry primate at the top. Yeah, that's what you looked at first. And there's a reason, of course, why we look at this first, because we are primates. We are like those. We have large brains. We have forward-facing eyes. We have little hands with little fingernails. We recognize a kindred spirit. But I have to say, and at the risk of becoming as unpopular as Chris Packham was when he said, we don't need pandas. He got sackfuls of hate mail after that. We don't, actually. The world would probably get by pretty well without pandas or a few other things. But it couldn't do very well without beetles and flies and all the rest of it, because they are the engines of ecology. They make ecology work. They are why the world looks the way it does. There's only one insect actually on this slide that we could really do without very, very easily indeed. And of course, it is this one here, which is the head lice, a remarkably interesting animal. And I've often observed that we could extirpate the head lice in 24 hours. Only occurs in our hair, it feeds on our blood, the whole cycle, eggs, nymphs, adults, on our hair. So we now have 7.7 billion human beings on Earth. We have 7 billion phone handsets, some of which are in a hole in the ground. But if we could get everybody to get near a phone handset, which shouldn't be too hard to do, we could send a global text. We could say, next Tuesday week, kill all the head lice, shave your head, burn it, whatever you have to do. And as long as everybody was okay about that, we could rid the world of one species in 24 hours, gone for all time. That's it. And it won't come back. And despite the fact that is theoretically possible, we are blithely extirpating countless thousands of species, the majority of which we don't know anything about at all. If you ask people, what sort of animals that they would pay to save, you would get the usual list: pandas, tigers, polar bears, the lynx, all these things. They'd say, oh yes, we would pay to save that. Yeah, that's certainly worth having on spaceship Earth. Well, are they? I don't know. What about things like this? They are surely much more valuable than any of those other things. They are responsible for recycling dung, of which there is a large amount. And there are 7,000 species of these insects. And without them, we might be in a bit of a jam. Now, of course, in ancient Egypt, they revered this animal. They were way ahead of their time. And I wish to goodness we were a little more revering of these insects today. One of the great Egyptian gods is often shown with a scarab head, Khepri, the being. And it's such a shame that we don't have this now. It's, retrograde. The thing I'm holding on the huge thing on the right hand of the screen was a beetle I found in Bhutan in elephant dung. One of the things that I was so glad to find. Heliocopterus. I had been filming this for the Lost Land of the Tiger, because they have to have little excerpts of other things, and I had found an enormous pile of elephant dung, and I had been going through this elephant dung for about 3 hours, and all I could find were things the size of a pinhead. And the TV crew were going, well, that's it's very nice, George, it's a bit small, have you got anything bigger? So I spent some more time digging through this stuff, and eventually, almost when I was about to give up completely, this enormous thing appeared. I'll tell you, I have never been so glad to see a dung beetle in my life. I could now stop digging. Anyway, they are essential because they recycle dung. And think about all the flies, these fantastic things who lay their eggs on animals who die, and within the space of a few days, a few weeks, it's reduced to bones. We would be up to our armpits in dung and decaying animals without beetles and flies. It's hard to believe a case on CSI would ever be solved without the humble blowfly. And yet, other jobs they do, if you think of herbivores, if I was to say to you, Africa and herbivores, well, you would be thinking for sure about, huge herds of grazing ungulates, gnu and wildebeest and zebra and giraffe and all the rest of it. In fact, these animals take a very small amount of green material away. The vast majority, and perhaps an order of magnitude more green material, is eaten by insects. So insects are the major herbivore on Earth. And if I was to say to you, carnivore and Africa, I would bet you at least 3/4 or more would be thinking about this animal. Spends most of its time doing absolutely nothing. It sleeps a lot. They occasionally have a fight. They may have a bit of sex occasionally, but basically, if they're not eating or asleep, that's it. And so, how they were able to make Big Cat Diary interesting was they had to film lots and lots of film and edit it down to about 100 to 1 to make it even vaguely interesting. But you might think carnivores, lions, hyenas, etc., all the rest of it. Well, of course, you'd be wrong, because insects consume orders of magnitude more animal flesh than all the big vertebrate animals added up. And so if you don't understand what insects are doing, you don't understand ecology at all. End of. And in fact, of all the insect carnivores, ants are the major carnivorous group, probably comprising about 1/4 of the total biomass in any habitat, whether it's your back garden or the savannas of Africa or a jungle. That's what a carnivore looks like. And of course, there are insects who lay their eggs inside other insects. And it was this, of course, that eventually caused Darwin to cause him to be worried about whether there could be a caring God, because he thought, how can I believe in a caring, compassionate God when he has created 1/4 of creation to eat the rest of creation alive? But it's a very successful plan, and food webs. If you care to spend 3 years in a jungle rearing every little mine from a leaf and rearing out every wasp, you end up with something that looks like this. You have fly hosts and you have the wasps on top, and these are the interactions which you can tease apart in a few years. And of course, the one that very few books have in, insects are the food of the world. Most birds eat insects, and large amounts of them. A swallow chick will eat 200,000 insects to become adult. A brood of great tit chicks, 120,000 caterpillars. All the blue tits in the UK are eating billions of insects. And of course, you've got aardvarks and reptiles and chimpanzees, bats. I mean, you simply would not have bats. That would be it. End of bats, end of birds. So insects are vital importance. And of course, our understanding of genes and genetics, physiology, behavior, ecology are based almost entirely on insects, because insects are animals, animal cells, insect cells are animal cells like anything else. They're very easy to rear. They're easy to use. You don't get the ALF blowing up your car on a Tuesday morning because you happen to work on cats. So it's one of those things, and you can find things out very quickly indeed by using insects than if you were to use a larger, slow-growing animal. But there's a problem, of course. There's always a problem. When I was a kid and we drove from Edinburgh to the west coast of Scotland on our holidays, the front of the car would be literally plastered in insects, covered. You'd have to scrape it off. In fact, you could buy special sprays at the garages, Bug Be Gone and all the rest of it. And these days, nothing. I can drive around Oxfordshire all summer and you might get a few insects, but not like you did in the past. In fact, this image isn't from a car in England at all. It's from a car in Ohio. Now, something has happened, and if you ask elderly individuals, and by that I mean even older than me, good heavens. They will talk about swarms of butterflies and clouds of this and clouds of that. You might imagine that they're making it up, that they're a bit confused in their old age, but you'd be wrong. They are not confused about this. There has been a dramatic decline. And these are just some of the actual headlines which we've had in the last 5 years. Insect apocalypse. This, a new word for me. Hyper alarming study. Oh my, hyper alarming. Basically, it's been all over the place. So hang on a minute. What's actually happening? Should we be worried? Should we be going, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world, you know, as we know it? Well, yes and no. And it all started, or it hit the headlines really big time with this work in Germany, where a group of amateurs, expert amateurs, I should say, using a malaise trap, which is basically a flight trap, where insects just sort of end up flying into it. And they collected it over quite a large area, and they compared a catch from 89 and a catch in 2013. Then sure enough, there was this massive drop, and this hit the headlines and went around the world. And in fact, that was the origin of the original phrase in headlines, you know, insect apocalypse. Well, hold on. This is a big claim. And for a big claim, you need big evidence, and you need hard evidence, and it has to be correct. There's one problem with this, is that they trapped in areas which were biodiverse. They picked these areas because they were reserves. And because there was a decline, they said, well, this is even worse, because if this is happening in these areas, which are bioreserves, you know, what is the rest of the country? It must be absolutely appalling. Well, hang on a minute. Imagine the wicked witch of Narnia hired you as an entomologist and said, right, mate, I want an ecological survey of Narnia, if you don't mind. And you would head around Narnia and you would decide that, yeah, there were some parts of Narnia which had very few insects, which I've indicated with individual flies. And there were some parts of Narnia which were really quite rich, lots of species, lots of different insects. And so if you were going to do a malaise trap, especially if the witch was breathing down your neck, you might not unreasonably choose to put a malaise trap here, here, and here, because you haven't got time to survey the whole of Narnia, for goodness sake. So let's bung them there and you'll get lots of results. The problem is, if you don't choose your sites randomly, and I'll just shift my head up there, if you pick them because they are known to be biodiverse, it's hard to imagine that in a few years' time they will become more diverse. They'll probably be the same or get smaller. It's not going to go the other way. And I think that that's a problem with some of this research, where they haven't picked the sites randomly, and so there seems to be a decline. Also happened on a piece of work over in Puerto Rico, where they had a tiny piece of forest, and they sampled it on 2 occasions, I think. Again, this is more errors here. They used a sweep net. Now, a sweep net is not a very good tool. It gives you an idea of what's there, but it's not something that you can actually quantify very easily. And they were able to get the mean dry mass of arthropods per 100 sweeps in the same area on, I think, 3 occasions or so, 2 occasions. And of course, there's a decline. Oh my goodness, massive, hyper alarming decline. Well, depending on who uses the net, and there are lots of shapes of net, of course, various designs. And if the operator is not trained, it can be inaccurate. And I think Prince Charles is probably doing his best here, but I might not believe the results of his work. But let's just say that insect populations fluctuate over time. And here's a graph from the year 2000 to 2016, and things fluctuate. They go up and down over time. Let's say you haven't got time and you can only spare 3 trips to the forest in Puerto Rico, and you do, and you go sample 3 times, and lo and behold, there's a decline. Now, it could easily have gone the other way, depending on when you went exactly. So again, you've got to take this sort of research with a pinch of salt, find out exactly how it's done. But big claims need big results. They need to be rock solid. Well, of course, with all this hyper alarming insect decline stuff, it wasn't long before one of the rags had this as its headline: insects could vanish within a century. No, they couldn't. No, they. Can I put your mind at rest here? I feel a bit like Michael Fish, and only individuals who are older will be aware of this. Michael Fish was a weatherman who was told that there was a hurricane coming, and said, don't apocalypse, because people get tired of it. They get fatigued, and eventually they go, yeah. Look, you said that last year and nothing's happened. You said that 10 years ago. There's still insects around here. I'm still being bitten by horseflies, So you do have to be careful that when you get your work in print, it's based on solid science. But that's not to say I don't believe there is a decline, because there certainly has been. And by every other index, whether you're looking at fish or flowers or reptiles or amphibians or whatever, there has been a steady decline over the last 40, 50 years. And the major drivers are quite obvious. I mean, we know. It's like we don't have to invent things anymore. We know that it's habitat loss, fragmentation, large areas of forest are being continued to be cut down. I used to be an eco-bore as a kid. I used to, after my degree, every party I was at, I'd go, have you heard about the rainforest? And eventually people, wouldn't ask me to the parties anymore. They go, oh, Christ, it's George, Jesus, quick, look the other way, leave, quick. He's going to go banging on about the forest any minute now. Well, of course, I've been banging about the forest for 40 years or more. And yet it's not done anything at all, because we get people like Bolsonaro and everybody else. And this is what happens. This is probably the biggest immediate threat to the diversity we have. So we know that 3/4 of all insect species live in these habitats. We know they cover now only 6% of the land area, and yet we are still removing huge swathes of it for soybean, for hamburgers, for oil palm. Why? Well, it's not hard to work out. There are just too many of us. But there was a time, of course, in the past when people used to say, oh yes, there was a time in the history of man when we were careful husbanders of the environment and we looked after everything because we understood. No, nonsense. The only reason that we didn't wreck it then was there were so few of us. That's all. I mean, that's the only reason that the habitat was able to survive and grow back enough in between being trashed. But now, of course, the demands are so high that it's just endless. Wildflower habitats like this that I probably saw when I was a kid, but I can't recall because I would have been very, very young at the time, are now rarer than a rainforest. 98% of that habitat, of this rich, flower-rich habitat, has gone. And of course, with them, all the insects. So, you improve grassland, and that means improve fertilized for sheep or whatever, for grass, and all that stuff goes. Dead wood, we've been banging on about dead wood for 20, 30, 40 years, saying leave it to rot, don't take it away, don't burn it, don't tidy it up. It's there, it's good stuff, it's a good habitat. 1/3 of the rarest insects in Europe live in habitats like this. Leave it. Get over yourselves. Get used to the fact that the woodland doesn't look terribly tidy. Oh, but something might fall off and hit somebody. Oh my goodness! And this whole litigious, we have to tidy it up in case somebody gets hurt. It's absurd, of course. Well, of course, I've been saying how fantastic insects are, and you might then say, well, hang on a minute, George, just a minute, wind your neck in. What about all the pests and crops? Yeah, sure. 15% of all crops globally are lost to pests of various sorts. And that's mainly because we grow crops in huge areas of the same thing, which just say, come on, guys, eat the crop, it's here. It's just all for you. There are other ways of growing crops. And today, millions of tons of pesticides, millions. There is supposed to be a place on the web where every country is supposed to put down how much tonnage of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides they use, and it isn't up to date. It's inaccurate. It isn't policed at all. But billions of bucks are involved. These outfits are very, very rich indeed, and you better have your facts very sharp about you, because they can employ the best lawyers in the world and you can't. So you do have to be extremely careful. I picked one thing that we all probably eat. Pure as the driven snow, honey. No, it's not now, not now. 75% of honey samples worldwide have measurable quantities of these new pesticides, the neonicotinoids, which are wreaking havoc on insects all over the world, and half of the honey samples had a cocktail of them. So you can't avoid it. What can we do? We must feed the world, they say. All these pesticide companies say, well, we are just feeding the world. How dare you accuse us of being money grubbing people? Well, actually, hang on a second, because let me just shift this up here. The World Health and the FAO estimate that about 33% of all food produced in the world is wasted, 1.3 billion tons. So if we could just get our heads together and stop wasting food, that would save more food than would be saved by not using pesticides. So we could stop using pesticides tomorrow, and as long as we didn't waste food, we'd still have 15% more food. Think about it. Well, in the late 1890s, John Haldane, who was the father of JBS Haldane, he was the guy who made the canary in the cage thing, and he thought it was a jolly good idea to take canaries into coal mines, because the poor men were inhaling all this filthy CO and NO2 and stuff and dying, and the canary would stop singing and fall off its perch. He kindly incorporated a small oxygen cylinder in his final plan. So on the newer plan, he had a little oxygen cylinder up here. So when the canary fell off its perch, the miners could close the front door and put some oxygen in and escape. But what we need, of course, is a global ecology canary in the coal mine. And of course, we have that. We have that right on our doorstep. Insects are the global ecological canaries. We can learn so much from just looking at insects, because they are telling us what we need to know. And these days, concern for the natural world has reached an all-time high, higher than any other survey. This was done last year, almost exactly 1 year ago. Concern reaches an all-time high. 9 out of 10 adults in England are concerned about increasing threats to the natural environment, with 2/3 of those specifically worried about loss of species. And of course, we've all heard about Extinction Rebellion, who I They're young. They'll learn eventually. But anyway, this is the real issue. This is the elephant in the room. And I have been in talks where I've shown this graph, and somebody has accused me of being a racist. I'm not talking about race or anything here. What I'm talking about is the simple fact that in the time that I have been alive, and I'll just draw this arrow here in red, hopefully. Let me get my arrow. So I was born in 54. Here we are. 1954. Arrow, please. Hold an arrowhead. There we are. 54. And there were about 2.4 billion on Earth. Well, we are now at this red line here, and there are now 7.7 or so billion. The per capita growth rate per annum is falling, of course, but that's still going to take us up to 9 billion to 10 billion. Highest estimates, maybe a little higher than that. I am reminded of a bacterial colony on an agar dish where the bacteria do extremely well for quite a long time. They grow exponentially until they reach the edge of the agar dish, at which point there is no more food and they all die. And I'm beginning to think we might be approaching that stage. 100 years ago, only 15% of the Earth's surface was used for crops and for animals. Today, it's 3/4. And wild habitats, wilderness, is just going before our very eyes. If I had the answers, if I had the answer to any of this, and it was actually workable, I would be head of the World Bank, head of the FAO, head of the UN, and all the rest of it. But I'm not. But you can draw a very, very close parallel indeed with our success and the rotted by intelligent individuals, politicians, lawyers, ecologists sometimes. Sustainable growth, they say, they shout. What we need is sustainable growth. And they pound the desk and look very earnest. But of course, the two words sustainable and growth cannot be put together. You cannot have sustainable growth. You can be sustainable. You can have growth, but you can't have both. Any amount of growth, any degree of growth is ultimately unsustainable. Until they get into their heads, we are doomed. And the other one that I really, really don't like is save the planet. Save the planet, they say earnestly, rolling their eyes up. This is just arrogance, total arrogance. The planet has been here for 4.5 billion years. Life got going pretty quickly, actually, after only perhaps 500 million years. It's very likely, indeed, that it has also happened on countless other small planets elsewhere out there, as Carl Sagan would say, in the cosmos. Save the planet. The planet does not need saving. The planet has seen off more extinctions than we could invent with all our brains at the one time. No, it's absurd. It's not save the planet. It is save ourselves. What we need to be thinking now, and very hard, is how are we going to save ourselves? Well, of course, the big problem, of course, is all the people around here. Well, some people, Hawking included before he died, said that the only possible answer was to find somewhere else to go, find an exoplanet somewhere, and head out there into space like rats heading off a sinking ship. Yeah, he said this is it. Well, there's a slight problem with this, is that the closest exoplanet that we found, and this is an artist's idea of how it might look, is about, I don't know, 18 trillion years away. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Wouldn't it be a better idea? Wouldn't it be a better idea to look after our own planet? But we are an adaptable and a very bright animal. We have a large brain, and in only 400 years, which is a speck of time, we have gone from, simple glass instruments to show animals up close, little things like this, to things like this, which can see inside insects, can take them apart bit by bit. We've seen the incredibly small SEMs, all sorts of stuff. And at the other end of the scale, in the same time frame, about 400 years, we've come from the first simple instrument, which had a magnification of about 8 times, which could see the rings on Saturn, to this thing here, the very intelligently and wonderfully named extremely large telescope, which is being built now. We are an amazing animal, but can we think? Can we invent our way out of the problem? I'm not sure we can, actually. I'm actually not sure that we can. In the 66 years that I've been alive, we've got the world free of smallpox. We've invented integrated circuits. We've sent objects around Earth. We've invented the atom bomb. We've worked out the structure of DNA. The genes in the unfortunate growth that I had were worked out because of we knew about the DNA, and because of the gene that I had that was not working, they were able to tweak a drug, and I now I'm still here. I mean, I would have been dead in a year had it not been for this early work in 53, 54. We've done heart transplants. We've worked out where we came from. We've walked on the moon. We've done all this stuff. Fan-bloody-tastic. But the place we live, the place that supports us and all other species, we are just paying no heed to at all. And last year, it's just been found out, the World Bank's lent $1.9 trillion directly linked to ecosystem and wildlife destruction. Now, just unbelievable. And if you want to have a check on it, there's the site at the foot there. So here we are at the end of my talk. Insects will definitely be a major component of global ecosystems, whatever they will be, for millions of years to come. I strongly suspect that we will not. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, George, for a wonderful talk. You've covered rather so much detail.
I can't hear you, Jack.
Thank you so much. And you can't hear us. Then that is my fault. You can't hear us. Oh, you can. Sorry, I think that's you, George.
Is that
Everyone
me?
else can hear us. I think that's you, George. Just to check, while George is sorting his sound, we'll just say thank you once more to George for the talk. We're going to do a bit of Q&A in a moment, but before then, just to say, unfortunately, the museum will be closing tomorrow morning, or rather, it will not be reopening tomorrow. So apologies to any of you who had bookings. The museum will, of course, reopen once more when government advice allows it to do so. And we're very much looking forward to welcoming you all back to these wonderful collections. You can see our friendly T-Rex over my shoulder, and even the wonderful building we're in. This is not a background. This is not a snazzy Zoom background. This is a real column of rock from Cornwall, and we're very much looking forward to seeing you all back here. Now, just before we do Q&A, I will just talk about what's coming up next. In 2 weeks' time, we're hoping by now you've already got your Wednesday evenings booked aside, and we're very pleased to say that in 2 weeks' time, we'll be joined by Georgina Ferry, who many of you might know as a very prominent science writer, New Scientist, and many other prominent pieces in the press. Will be talking to us about minerals, molecules, and the Nobel Prize, Dorothy Hodgkin and the University Museum. And that'll be the inside story on Dorothy Hodgkin's pioneering work, which took place in this very building. And the link to sign up to that is in the chat, so you can sign up to that now. Now, without further ado, after such a wonderful talk, we've had lots of questions coming in, so we're going to jump back across to Chris, who's got first question.
Lovely, thanks very much, Jack. Well, first question, we've got a lot of young entomologists and excited young entomologists.
Right.
So we've got Theo, age 6, who's asked, what's your favourite species of insect, George? And I have to say, well done for using the word species there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Theo, I get asked this quite a lot, I have to say. I am extremely fortunate in having 5 or 6 insect species named in my honor, which is great. So these are new species of insect which have been named by other entomologists, and they have named them after me. So I've got a bug and an ant and a shield bug somewhere, and a cockroach as well, various other things, and all these are wonderful. The chances of me seeing them in the wild are pretty slim. I hope they survive me, which they probably will do now. But my favorite, it's very hard to pick a favorite, very hard to pick a favorite. But I mean, if I can pick a group of insects, it's bees. I think we really need to hug our bees, hug a bee, pretty soon.
Becky.
Well, on that note, we had a little bit of a skirmish online between Stephen and Joris, where actually I think Joris was saying that. There was a little bit of a disagreement where there was a bit of a disagreement about whether honeybees were actually bad for other pollinators, whether the unnatural density of them was actually detrimental to the biodiversity of other pollinators.
Yes, I mean, it's always the same. Whenever we interfere with the natural world, we tend to get it wrong. I mean, this is why Africanized bees in America and South America are so bad. It was a guy who thought he could get more honey. He basically thought, if I can get these African queens over and I can breed from them, I can get more honey, more money, more honey, more money. That's what it was all about. And of course, somebody in his house saw the bees trapped inside this cage, and they thought it was a bit unfair, and he let them out. And of course, now we find that the Africanized honeybees in that part of the world are extremely aggressive. So they will attack you from 100 yards away and sting you again and again and again. And individuals have died simply because somebody thought they could make a bit of money. And I'm afraid this is something we're seeing again and again. We're seeing the natural world losing out in the face of money every time, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a train, railway to get you there faster, or whether it's housing, whatever it happens to be, the natural world always comes off worst. And I think we're at that point now, and I hate to be depressing about this because I spend large parts of my life now being depressed about it, and other people I know are as well. I just wish we'd be a little smarter, but it seems we just can't help ourselves.
And on that point about the need for conservation, just a reminder once more that the museum here is a charity, and as well as putting on public events like this, we're of course in charge of looking after the wonderful collections here, which contain over 7 million specimens, and also work on research and public engagement. So if you are able to give, please do give with the link that is up in the chat now. And we are asking you, with today's theme being about insects, please do consider giving to our Hope Project, which is conserving one of the most important insect collections anywhere in the world. So that link's up in the chat. And at that point, we'll pop back to Chris for a few more of your questions.
Thanks, Jack. Well, it's interesting to talk about the collections because, of course, George knows all this fantastic stuff because he's been able to study the data in collections like ours and actually, mine it for this information. So we've got some really good questions from people that would like to follow in your footsteps, George. From David, we've actually got a question saying, "Hi, George. My son Oscar, age 10, is a big fan and would like to be a scientist studying animals. What advice would you give him?" And then from DAFID, we have, there are several entomological societies, but what single thing could we do to engage children with insects? So if I can combine those two.
Hang on a second. I actually have it here. As I said earlier in my, yes, here we are. This is what you buy them. It's as simple as that. It's a little hand lens. That's it. And that is the door, that is the keyhole to the most incredible world that will just blow their minds. I remember the effect it had on me, and as I say, I've always had one. Kids are fascinated by the natural world, and between the ages of 5 and 12, they are constantly interested. Something happens to them about 12, 13, 14. I think it's boys and girls and that sort of thing. But if you can get over that bit, you can have a fantastic career. I could probably have been richer. I could probably have been traveling all the world. Well, I have been. But if I was to do have my life all over again, I would do exactly the same thing. I cannot imagine anything more worthwhile for any child for the rest of their life than to understand the natural world. And especially these days when we're locked down for the next 4 weeks, get out in the woodland. Find yourself a woodland. Find yourself a piece of habitat. You can drive to it now. You don't have to be stuck, in your home area. Find a dead log. Take a dead log apart. Have a look for all the things that are inside it. Learn. This is why we're here, basically.
Oh, that's fantastic, George. Glad to know that I'm not the only one carrying these things around.
Chris.
You mentioned teenagers, sort of losing interest sometimes, but obviously people come back to these things. I know I was vaguely sidetracked by girls and things like that when I was a teenager, but other people obviously are, because from our questions we've got people. Lucy's asking, is there any recommended reading to get a better understanding of entomology? She's asking as a complete novice with very limited knowledge, but she's really keen to learn.
Interestingly enough, I'm actually doing the second edition of my wonderful book, which is now very old. I'm just holding it up here. Essential Entomology. Plug. It's now a bit out of date, actually. It's being upgraded, so that'll be out next year. But there are lots of field guides, and the best thing to do is to buy a good field guide to insects and just see what's out there. And of course, there's now internet. There's all kinds of things on the internet. There's lists of all the flies in Britain, all these pictures of spiders. It's a lot easier than when I was a kid, I can tell you. It was interesting. Edinburgh was asked this. Edinburgh was asked by somebody. He said, "Isn't it marvelous, Sir David, how you've retained your great love and appreciation of the insect world and the natural world?" And Edinburgh looked at him and said, "Yes. And how did you lose yours?" He said, and that I think is that pretty much summed it up.
Well, I think the last question we're going to go for is actually there's a statement of concern actually about impact of street lights on insects. But Jenny actually asks, what's the most important thing that we can do as individuals to help insects? I think that's probably
organic food. There are lots of things you can do, and they're not. Sometimes they're not easy. Palm oil, for instance. Don't buy anything with palm oil in it. I don't anymore. But you have to read the packets really carefully. There are now 200 different words by which they conceal the fact that it contains palm oil. But they're there, and they're on the internet. Palmate, is the obvious one. And if it contains palm oil, just don't buy it, because anything you buy with palm oil in it has contributed pretty largely to the destruction of forests in Southeast Asia. You can use the things that have coconut oil. Again, that's slightly better. Olive oil. You don't have to use palm oil, but yet it's become universal. It's widespread, and the more people buy the stuff, the more uses they find for it, the more of the forest is cut down, because it's all about making money. Well, when are we going to realize that we don't need money? You just don't need it. When everything has gone to hell in a handcart, the last thing you need is money. What you need is wilderness.
Or insects, I think, as well. So with that, George, I think I need to thank you so much for giving us such an interesting talk. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you. And I think I better hand